Hello, and welcome to episode 7 of Waypoint, the AirMed&Rescue podcast. I'm your host, John Adams, and today I'll be talking to Tyson Smith, the General Manager of Commercial Partnerships for LifeFlight Australia. Hi, I'm speaking to Tyson Smith from LifeFlight Australia. Welcome, and it's a pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, thanks, John. Thanks for having me on.
No problem at all. So LifeFlight Australia is a specialist organisation that deals with long-distance emergency medical care in remote and rural areas, and that's going to be the main topic today. But it also does so much more. It provides aeromedical services, both fixed wing and rotary wing. It has the training academy, does its own sort of engineering services, but it also supports other special missions that AirMed&Rescue cover. So there's been support for firefighting, for search and rescue, and law enforcement operations. Is that right?
Yeah, 100%, John. It's grown over the years. So we've been at this game for about 45 years now, and it all started on the Gold Coast in Queensland in a little AS350, which we still have today. And our CEO was a crewman on that,
Right.
and he built it into what it is today with the dedication of the teams behind us. So all those little areas you mentioned help make what LifeFlight is today, LifeFlight. So
Amazing.
yeah, we can dig into that a little bit if you want.
Well, let's start with a bit about you. That's why we've got you on here, because you're a subject matter expert. I want to know what got you into aviation.
Yeah, perfect. Well, I guess, yeah, thanks. A bit humble over here in Australia. We don't like talking about a lot of things that happen and what happens in our life, and we just go about our business, and
Sure.
I'm lucky enough to be in the job we're in now. So, but what got me into it, I just have a real passion for helping people. So I grew up in rural, actually outback Australia in town, but my family had a farm and we ran cattle and had some agriculture. And as I was growing up out there, I went through schooling and done everything locally, and then I become interested in the fire services out there. So the urban fire brigade out there, and the red trucks, they have all they do the house fires, road traffic accidents, things like that. So I started to specialise in those areas. And as I was doing those specialties and I was in it for a few years, LifeFlight, which was CareFlight at the time, but LifeFlight put a helicopter out there to support the oil and gas industry through some of the booms for the medical capability to protect everyone in the field. So I went out there and we had a show and tell of the helicopter, and I always thought, oh, this is pretty cool. I was a pretty young lad back then. I was still in my early 20s, and I managed to talk my way into and get an interview with the company, and to do my technical skills for fire service, and then move into an aircrew role with the helicopter out there doing the winching and the aircrew navigation base management role for one of the remote bases, I would call it, up in Gladstone, which is off the middle central coast of Queensland. So that's what really got me in. I love the technical skill, and I love helping people. So that was a way to put my fire service, my rural community hat on, and then go and be able to be on the aircraft and be part of the crew. So hopping off a fire truck onto a helicopter, which is pretty cool. Not everyone gets the chance and opportunity to do that, so I took it by the horns.
So you've been with LifeFlight now for 14 years, starting off as an air crewman, as you said, working with the winches and stuff. And then you've been going through sort of instructor roles, and you're now currently the general manager of commercial partnerships, which gives you oversight of the Jet Air Ambulance department as well. Can you walk us through the roles and responsibilities of these positions and how you leverage your experience going through these different roles to better perform in your current duties?
Yeah, of course. So I think I took a bit of not a sidestep, but I went from air crew for a few years up in Gladstone, like I said. But I think one of the things that really made me open my eyes up to what the possibilities were and use my skill to help more people was to actually hop off the aircraft myself and go into more of a instructor role to pass on skills I've learned throughout the industry, and then also learn off other people's skills who have been doing it longer, right? So as an instructor, you get to interact with people who have been doing aviation and in aviation, especially aeromedicine and search and rescue for many years. I can still remember doing in the instructor role for the Hewitt. So I was a Hewitt instructor, underwater escape training, which is so interesting. Again, growing up in the bush, there's not much water that you get exposed to, right? So I used to hate doing the Hewitt training as a air crewman. So to go into an instructor role was a challenge for me. But I just really enjoyed seeing people getting through their skill sets. And I can still remember, we do training. I can touch on it later on when we talk about LifeFlight, but we train our doctors. Every 6 months, we do a doctor intake in Queensland, where we bring like nearly 40 doctors on board from Australia and overseas to do their pre-hospital care components on their medical degree, so to speak, or they're upskilling. And some of these doctors can come from countries that aren't used to swimming, so putting them in a machine, putting them in a pool and trying to get them through a skill that lets them then go and help people in a helicopter. And, you got to get them through. So, and seeing them achieve that when some people can't really even swim is a testament to, enjoying the role. And I really loved that. So going from that instructor role, I just moved into our operations centre, and as a general manager now of commercial partnerships, I now use the instructor role, the online, being in the front line, and then also being in our operations room for a number of years. I can now come and talk to you and then talk to others, and then hopefully highlight what our crew can do in the capability and really put them on a pedestal. But also it's all about building the business that LifeFlight does. I think we've got a really good product, and I think that they're getting the community feel still into this kind of commercial space is hard to do, but we are making it very bespoke and being adapted to the changes. As you know, probably a lot of the listeners would know, COVID made everyone adapt to everything. So coming out of the back of that, I've really sidestepped into the jets in COVID, and coming out of that, I have a passion now for international retrieval, and it keeps things very interesting. I can tell you that much.
So you mentioned about the sort of, you grew up in a sort of rural area. A lot of some of the training takes people from different walks of life. What sort of medical emergencies do LifeFlight tend to respond to in these remote rural areas? Or there's also a lot of islands that are around Australia, so that must be different from the mainland as well. They would all have different problems or medical emergencies that are distinct.
Yeah, 100%. So again, for the listeners out there, the Australian landscape at the moment is a majority of our population lives on the coastline around Australia. Yep. However, the vastness of it means that we still have isolated and the other 20% that live in rural and remote areas. So, our medical teams and aircraft have to be equipped, obviously, to get to the coast and then do all those short hops, but also be equipped to go out for helicopters, that is, and medical, to go out into these rural remote areas where it might take 2 hours or multiple refuels to get to a cattle station or get to a property or a little township that something's happened. And we normally find that in those areas it's like a traumatic injury or a search and rescue where someone's gone missing, or people just don't underestimate the size and scale of the roads after rain, and where they're going. So to be adaptable in that situation is hard. Growing up out there, I think there was always a couple of different options for us, but there was nothing that could land right next to you. So if I had an accident on the cattle property, or if there's a farmer out there who had an accident on their cattle property, there's nothing that can actually come directly to you so fast than a helicopter, right? Yeah. A plane can land at a runway or a road or a dirt strip. That's fine. But however, some of these properties are over 80 to 100,000 acres. So you put that's a huge area that you may have to still hop on the back of a ute and transport a medical team in and transport a medical team out. And normally if you have a spinal injury or something like that, that's not a good way to go. So having these abilities to go to those remote areas is fantastic. I think a mission that probably highlights to me early on when I was in Roma was I was actually probably 3 or 4 weeks into being on standby out there as a winch operator on the machine at Roma. And it had just rained probably 7 days before getting this call. And we went out to the base in the morning to do the pre-checks on the helicopter and to make sure that everything was working correctly. And then we were having a brief and a coffee, and the call came in from Australian Maritime Search and Rescue of a personal locator beacon going off at a state forest up near Longreach. Right. So that's a long way away for us. Well, that was nearly a 2-hour flight from us. So, and at that stage, we were operating the Bell 412. It was a EP and it had a long range fuel tank in it, which was good, but meant we had to be pretty heavy on weight. So we had to kick out a bit of equipment, pick which equipment we had. So the stretcher had to come in. And where the beacon was going off was right on the edge of a forestry, and it was registered to a adventure rider. So he did the right thing. He had a PLB on him, and it was registered to him, and he was travelling through, it looks like a forestry road. So we started up and took off and went out there, and it was about an hour and 20 by memory transit time to get overhead. And it turns out this time we didn't have to winch. We could. We always try not to winch our crews. Obviously, it's the most risky thing you can do, especially at night. So if you can find a location around the area of the land that was easy for the team to access, we could. And we managed to land it was still a confined area, but we still managed to land and get our medical team to the rider. And what had happened is this guy who was travelling, he was actually doing a trip across Australia, and he was doing a trip horizontally. So he started off in Western Australia and he was coming all the way through the country, and he got to Queensland. This is nearly halfway across Queensland, and he's come a mischief, and he's hit some black soil after the rain that was all covered up, and the bike's actually toppled him over. He reckons he was doing about 70 to 80k an hour on this road, and the bike had toppled over. He had a fractured pelvis. The bike had moved probably 100 to 150 metres in front of him with all his equipment on it. But you know what saved him? He had the personal locator beacon underneath his motorbike jacket because he couldn't move with that broken pelvis. So he said the last thing he can remember seeing after catching up with him after the incident was the belly of the aircraft coming over with the words LifeFlight underneath it. So I don't know if that puts the viewers into perspective. This guy was probably hours away from a township in the middle of nowhere with a personal locator beacon, and our helicopter and doctor and nurse and paramedic, was there within an hour and a half of him hitting that beacon. And we flew him to Brisbane that day to have surgery because he had some internal injuries and everything, and he made a full recovery.
Amazing. So you've mentioned before about having to have, because the vastness of the country, you have to have refueling stops. How does LifeFlight itself mitigate difficulties with the distance and the poor infrastructure, if there are dirt roads, or if there's areas that are just unprepared for aircraft? Do you have stations dotted all around the country that you can sort of hop to, or do you have agreements or with other companies that will help you in this regard?
Yeah, so we don't land any of our fixed wing aircraft on dirt or gravel strips because we primarily operate turbines, air jets. So speaking of from the helicopter side, I could probably say that we can use the Mount Isa area is the perfect area where Mount Isa is up in the top part of Queensland, inland on the Northern Territory border for your viewers following along for for your listeners for a geographical assessment afterwards. It's up there, and we go to a town called Burketown, and we have a BK117 up there aircraft, and it has to go up into that and service that whole region up there. Now it's going to get upgraded to a 139 shortly, thanks to the state government giving us some funding, which is going to increase our range and minimise our fuel stops. But at the moment, we rely on key fuel drops and pick up from drums and Jet A1 fuel that are scattered around the stations up there. So our helicopter, we have them all marked up on a big map in our briefing room. The guys touch base, like the crewmen, the local area have a system that they touch base and make sure that there's fuel available each week at certain locations. And that happens along Roma as well. They do fuel drops, and we have it all marked out on areas. The fuel infrastructure is getting better at a lot of airfields out there, but specifically in North Queensland and up I can speak for some of the other operators up in near Weipa and everything like that. It does get hard to operate and find fuel, so you've got to be pretty resourceful with your flight planning. We rely on drum fuel stock a lot up in that region. So having people do checks on that is probably the most important part. Landing on dirt and in remote areas is pretty much our bread and butter for our helicopter world. Our pilots are trained pretty to a high standard. So doing a lot of roadsides, I would find that's nearly 50% of our work is doing primary accidents. So roadsides, farmlands, workplace injury, stuff like that is kind of where we are used to landing. But doing the mission planning, it probably takes another, we could be airborne. We've got to be airborne within 15 minutes during the daytime for the helicopters, right? So by planning up north, you normally expect a 5 to 10 to maybe even 15-minute delay just so the guys can ensure there's fuel on the way. They've also got to plan on the way and then also on the way back. So they can't use it all on the way up there and have nothing left. So they have to do really accurate fuel planning in that region to make sure they have enough to sustain them to come through.
You've mentioned about the preparation that goes into responding to, for instance, that travel writer. You had to decide on your equipment. You had to work out sort of weight limits, and also with the sort of the fuel management. With air medical transfers or other medical care, do you always send teams from the base where the aircraft is situated, or do you use local teams? And are there other sort of medical care services that LifeFlight provides if an aircraft isn't necessarily available or needed? And how do you determine what's needed where?
Yeah, so that's probably a great question to lead into highlighting I kind of call it the whole LifeFlight component. So yes, our bases, the primary question, the bases are manned with a standard configuration of crew. So most bases have a pilot, a aircrew officer, a paramedic and a doctor. Yep. Some bases have a nurse instead of a paramedic, and that's mainly because they do a lot of inter-hospital transfers. So it's a really good skill set to have a nurse on your helicopter who's used to interacting with all the ICU rooms and equipment day in, day out, whereas the paramedics are really good at the pre-hospital care, right? These guys and girls have been on the road for many years, 10 plus years, dealing with road traumas and primary accidents. So they're very good at the pre-hospital care and wrapping them up and making sure that patient's stable for flight. Yeah. So that's our standard crew configuration through our bases. We do send our doctors. The Queensland government, we supply our doctors in Queensland and on the jets to all the aerial assets, a majority of the aviation assets in Queensland. That's so our doctors, LifeFlight doctors, will be on the RFDS assets, the Queensland government assets, and then you can picture them like in the control centre in the government when they're planning all the movements out for the day. They pretty much use them as a geo ring, right? So if the patient, there's a road trauma 10 minutes down the road and the paramedics on site with the doctor, they'll go in the road ambulance. So it's a very dynamic situation. You can treat them all as an asset. So the helicopter is used just for a transport asset sometimes. And the doctors and the medical are the really key component, and they plan and we plan where we put them at some time. So we have them up in the oil and gas fields as well. And the telemedicine, I think, gets overlooked sometimes. I think it's becoming more prevalent in the industry, and a really key point to any operations of a large scale is making sure that we got telemedical and a solid backing for our in-field doctors. So what I'm trying to get at there would be having our doctors on site have a really clear access if there was a emergency going on, or if they can't, they need an extra set of eyes, so to speak. They can quickly ring up our ops centre, and we have a on-call duty medical coordination arrangement with our own internally trained consultant doctors, and they're scattered out and they're on call 24 hours a day on a rotating roster. And they're the backbone of our telemedical. So it's not just our doctors on the ground and nurses and flight crew, it's actually also all the advice we give. So we also have a really cool contract with the AMSA for the telemedical advice service for all the ships at sea in the Australasian region. So that's about I can't remember the exact number, so don't crucify me here on this one, but I think it's about 1.2 million square kilometres of ocean that the Australian Maritime Search and Rescue Area is. So any vessel in that region that comes in and they have a medical emergency, or they go through the AMSAR Centre in Canberra, or they can come direct to us, and we provide the clinical consult and guidance on what to do with that patient. So I've personally been in the ops room, and I've got to coordinate and oversee some pretty crazy missions in terms of where someone can get sick and how the care's got to them. And that could be through an airdrop arranged with a whole heap of specific medical supplies, and arranged through the ADF, and our doctors and our ops teams are coordinating that to make sure it's packaged up, and then it goes into a AMSAR coordinated mission to do the drop. So a lot of the state and government agencies have to come together quickly to save something like that. But that's all, again, back to the telemedical and the initial advice that's given from our doctors making assessments. So, but that's the basic crew. But back to the winching scenario, sometimes I didn't always go on missions as a winch operator. You wouldn't want to send me on a hospital transfer, right? I'm a 6'2" guy. I weigh about 100 kilos. There's nothing worse than showing up to a pilot and saying, "Can you take me along for the flight?" And they're like, "That's 100 kilos of fuel," So I wasn't always welcome on the missions, and you always got to be ready for mission specific components. So I guess it's got to be adaptable for that.
Yeah. And so this adaptability, the range of aircraft that you have, the range of other vehicles and staff that you have, who makes the decisions about which aircraft and which teams go where? The operations center, but is there, how do you train for that? How do you know, how does that work?
Yeah, so in Queensland, what happens here for the state government, for the helicopters and the jets sometimes. So we provide the doctors for the rosters and the helicopters to make sure each base is online. So Brisbane, Toowoomba, Bundaberg, Mount Isa, Sunshine Coast. That's the helicopter bases, and we make sure they're online day and night shifts, and and the doctors are where they can be, right? So we supply that. We make sure that that's online. So, and then the government come in and they do day night shifts, and they have a look at their patient flow, all the hospitals and all the areas and all the 000 calls. It's called Retrieval Services Queensland. So they sit off to the side of the Queensland ambulance room, and they manage the specialised transfers to keep bed management, bed flow, and all the primary accidents and throughout the state. There's a northern zone and the southern zone. Queensland split in half, so they see everything coming in all day, every day. So at night time. And what happens then, if they need an asset that's something closest, they will go to the closest available asset with a suitable skill set, and they will ring our ops centre to go, can we task this aircraft to here? And then we connect and do all the data in the back end to make sure the crew are happy. We've got an integrated app with our ops centre to our pilots and aircrew in the aircraft. So we input the mission details, and they can pretty much just say yes or no, and they go, and then they get the mission loaded onto the iPad in the aircraft, and it's a great little system to reduce that and speed up the response time for the people.
Well, that was going to be my next question. It seems like you said the response to the story you're telling earlier was incredibly quick, and so you must have very efficient processes. And is that helped with a lot of digital aid and assistance, or is it just experience from your staff, or is it a combination, or is there anything else that sort of really helps speed up this process? Because attending to traumatic injuries, you need to be there as soon as possible, don't you?
Yeah, 100%. I guess, like most aviation companies, we try and make sure we're on the digital edge, if that makes sense. However, it's a complicated process, right? So you're dealing with clinical and aviation, then patient records and the confidentiality. And so, yes, we do. However, we try and break it down to the most basic form that's tried and tested, right? So the phone call always works. We're starting to adapt digital communication more and more, especially for our international operations. It's a lot easier. So like services like WhatsApp, instant messaging, Signal, stuff like that into our ops center. So it's really helped with our telemedical, actually, that side of things, and our remote areas where the cell coverage is no good, but they have a piped in internet line, right? So all your digital media and all your digital communications work perfectly. So that helps with the rural remote stuff. Starlink's been a huge thing out west, I guess, for telehealth as well. So it helps us for our remote deployments. When we go away on flood work or something like that, our crew always take a Starlink with them now. So we adapt to the process and how we can for technology. But it's more the integration part, and saving minutes without the crew on the phone and having them start the aircraft is probably the best part that we can have, right? So the app has helped do that. And it's also helped with the post-mission recovery as well. So the crew don't want to be sitting there and enter data about where they flew and all their flight logs and everything. If this app can do it in flight, when they land, they hit finished, it's done. So, you know what I mean? So they're ready for the next mission quicker. It's a fantastic service that we've engaged with there. I think it's been a really winner for our crew and our ops team. And we're going to try and keep going with the digital. I think our ops centre is just about to do a digital upgrade for their phone communication system to put things in the cloud and make it more, bring it into the 22nd century and 21st century. So with the technology, and make sure we're in front of that, or else you're not in front of it, you can't help your crews. It's going to be a real game changer coming forward, I think.
And similarly, you've also mentioned that you work a lot with the Australian government, you work with other services. How do you sort of foster these relationships, and how is that sort of arranged?
Well, yeah. So doing what we do for so long, I guess it can be easier for a company that's really well ingrained into the state and local governments, but that takes a lot of work, right? That's built up over 45 years worth of relationship building and making sure we can just deliver. I think it's just delivering the best service you can possibly deliver and backing up what you can say in the industry. So if we need to spend money in a certain area for clinical upgrades or equipment, we go and do that. And then we do worry about the funding, but we just go and do it to make sure that we can do what we can say. So I guess the biggest thing is that, the relationship building comes down to being open, honest, and upfront with these agencies, and then probably just understanding their exact needs, because sometimes you can get wrapped up in exactly what you need. You're talking medical, aviation. Some people don't understand what you can actually deliver. So, it's all about listening and then backing up with the good skill set that you have and all the crews. So getting in with these government agencies and supporting them in some of the key times has been something I've been proud of personally, just helping Australians out there in need and other nationalities. For example, like White Island, for example, when the volcano went off in New Zealand, having a company of our scale and having our jets that, we had our Challenger 604, and we knew we had written the procedures, and, for our transporting burns patients, for example, we've got a lovely SOP for transporting burns patients thanks to our clinical governance team. And then having that capability to rapidly adapt it within 24 hours to put 2 medical teams on that aircraft to transport 2 severely burned patients. So we put 2 doctors and 2 nurses on our Challenger with 2 pilots and flew it to New Zealand to help out obviously that disaster network area there. And we got the patients back to Sydney for the care, and they survived. And I think about 6 months later, we actually repatriated them back to Germany. They were German tourists. So we helped. Right. We helped them from the whole way along there, but that was just a really good highlight of the government. They reached straight out to us directly. That was the Australian government and New Zealand government to help see what we could offer, and they also sent their own assets over. So it was really good to work with all those agencies, just based on the clinical offerings that we can give.
You've mentioned that a lot of the population is along the coast, but also that the country is very large and dry. How does LifeFlight manage the maintenance and engineering for salt and dust and sand that affects the sort of delicate equipment and parts that you have on your aircraft?
Yeah, well, if they're complicated, no, it's actually not that complicated at all. Sometimes for the aircraft themselves, some of the most delicate stuff to deal with are the engines on the airframe, right? So these are jet engines, a lot of moving parts. Sometimes a lot of moving parts, but they can degrade their performance quickly if they get foreign objects and particles into their fan blades. Yeah. So all our bases around do compressor rinses and compressor washers on their aircrafts. And that's, for everyone listening, that is pretty much, I'll try and make it as basic as possible, but that's pretty much, they take the spark plugs out of the engines. They plug in pretty much like a hose adapter to each engine, and it comes out a lightly pressurized mixture of, like a soap mixture. That's specially designed to go into engines, of course. And that goes in and they start to turn over the engine without the igniters in or spark plugs in. And what that does is that pushes that chemical through the engine, and it just sticks to the fan blades and sticks on the inside, and it sits there for a few minutes. And what that does is it pretty much acts like that foam wash you see on cars. It grabs all those little particles that you can't see and everything that sits on the fan blades, and then they wash it off with some water by plugging in the water side of the unit and doing the start without the spark plugs in it again. And that really cleans the engines out, and they do that once or twice a week, especially on the coast, and that's because the salt water as well at the coast is not just the dust particles. And then they do a performance check afterwards. Once the engines are dry, they put the spark plugs back in, they start the aircraft back up. And this happens in the morning within about 30 to 40 minutes. And they do a performance check to make sure the aircraft is still performing and the engines are still producing the right amount of torque and power they need to operate. So that's one component that they do just for the engines of the aircraft. I know personally in Gladstone, I think in the tropical areas, some of the little things that can get you is mold in the base, right? So, the tropical humid environment of Australia, mold can get into everything. If it's in, once it's in. So you can get into your medical stores. So having your dehumidifiers, everything clean and washed and, in those areas is important. So a lot of our bases have dehumidifiers in them in certain rooms, in your equipment room, right? You don't want to put a harness on and turn around, there's a big bit of black mold on the harness.
No.
So, it's not a good look. It's not a good look, not a good feel. So, it's the little things, and that comes through tried and tested. It still took one base and one person to find out, hey, I've got mold here, so now we need to adapt to it. So now we've got procedures that when we set up a base, if we go anywhere near a humid environment, we've got a standard kit we send out. So it's all those little things that work, I guess, to keep everything serviceable and moving along. So,
You've also mentioned that not every mission has a winch operator if it's not needed. Do you always on the side of caution when, for instance, all you know is a location and a personal locator beacon has gone off? You don't have any other details other than that. Do you just try and take as much as you can, if you can, just in case? Or do you really sort of strip it back to the basics and just trust on the skills of the team to sort it out when they get there?
Yeah. Well, normally now, which is, we're lucky from my story, that was probably about 7 to 8 years ago now, my story. So we're very lucky now. We operate a number of 139, Augusta Westland 139 aircraft now. So those things are the Ferraris of the sky. They are a performance machine. I love them. So that means we can put more equipment on. But as soon as you tell the medical staff they can put more equipment on, they've pretty much got an operating theatre in the back if you let them. So we've got to be careful with what we put on. So it's, yes, to your question, we very cautious approach. We get a good size up with whatever hard information we have. So if we know the exact area and location. We go with that hard information, but we try and discard some of the soft information. So, like, there's some trees there maybe, and there was a farmhouse up there, the landing pad there. But if it's not hard confirmed, it's soft information. So you can't really act on that, especially when you're sending these helicopters and crews hours away from civilization sometimes. And we've got to make sure we take what we can. Our standard configuration now in the 139s, however, you can take the winching equipment and a stretcher and all the medical equipment with you. So you may sometimes have to land beside it before you get to where the beacon's going off, say in a paddock somewhere, just to reconfigure the aircraft. But first they would go probably have a look at where it is. If they have to do a winch, the gear would be on board, but sometimes they might have to land just away from where they are and then reconfigure. So take the medical stretcher out and put, say, the winch basket or winch stretcher in and kit up and put harnesses on and everything like that. Well, our crew fly with harnesses, so put their actual gear on if it's going into water and things like that. Yeah, so we carry it. However, you can reconfigure. So the multi-role capability of the 139s in operations is pretty dynamic for that kind of thing as well. So it's been great to see. And I guess the same can be said for the fixed-wing fleet. In COVID as well, we normally always have 2 stretchers in each of our aircraft, right? 2 Spectrum stretchers in our aircraft with 9,000 litres of oxygen in each stretcher, fully charged at all times. So one of the largest O2 supplies any medical staff member or inpatient can wish for in an aircraft, and they're sitting there ready to go. However, if there's a security risk in the region, which we recently had in New Caledonia, actually, we didn't have to use the option, but security risk or in COVID where you might have to move a lot of people, right? So they might not be sick, but you might have to move a lot of people to get them out of harm's way. Yeah. We can configure our aircraft to take those 2 stretchers out and put an extra 2 to 4 seats in. So that gives our capability. And we can do that in about 2.5 to 3 hours. And then aircraft can depart. So the multi-role between all the fleet is pretty good to see. And it's all situation dependent. So we listen, we watch what's happening, we watch what's needed, and then we go on and act on what the information is we're given.
I think that's probably about all the time we have for today. I wanted to ask if there's anything else that you wanted to just explain about the work that you do or about LifeFlight generally before we sign off.
Yeah, I guess down here in Australia, dealing with a lot of the European operators in the air ambulance world, it's refreshing to see that when we come out and we talk. I know personally when we talk about what we do, it's a cool environment because we get a very good mixture of a bit of everything down here. We do oil and gas work. We do hospital transfers. We do primary incidents around the place. And then we do jet air ambulance. So we go cross-continental transfers. So we transfer people from continent to continent and take them home. We got a base in Singapore. I guess it's just amazing to be part of, I think, LifeFlight this growth period. And it's going to continue to grow now that we've got really good connection with the state government here. I think the feedback from them is we're delivering a great product. I think we want to keep doing that, and our teams are so dedicated. They all take ownership of their individual sections, right? And they cross-pollinate when needed. So I think that's a great part to building this kind of operation, right? Because aviation's not easy as we're seeing around the world, and medical's not easy. So you're really ramming those 2 components in together. So. Yeah. But last year, I just can't believe that we helped around 8,000 people last year in our aircraft and our medical teams. And we responded to 157 people per week. So that's about our medical teams and our crews, we helped one person every 64 minutes on average last year. Gosh. And personally, I'm sitting there, you can't fathom the number of that, right? Like it's a lot in Australia. So, I guess, helicopters do over 3,000 missions a year. 3,300 actually last financial year. So, and our jets did double what they did in the year before in terms of people. They transferred 948 people last year. So, I think the last thing I could say, just an envy of everyone doing their job in LifeFlight and what they do. And I'm looking forward to continuing to grow the business and what I can in my new role as the manager of commercial partnerships by highlighting some of the cool missions we do, highlighting some of the work people do in the background, I guess. Right down to our accounts people. You can't keep the lights on if you don't pay the bills. So, sure. It's fantastic what everyone does in this place. And I think they've got a real sense of pride down here in Australia that we're kind of like, as you see, in the Olympics and all the other sporting components, Australians trying to punch above their weight and whatever they can do because they use their passion. They use their passion. So, I love it. So thanks for having us on, John.
No, thank you for speaking to me. And it's been an absolute pleasure. That's all for today. I want to thank Tyson Smith again for joining me, and remember to subscribe so you don't miss out on any of our future episodes wherever you get your podcasts.